echoes of the unseen. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the video.
We'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this.
So leave it in the comments.
When you're ready, get comfortable and relax.
My name is Reese, and I'd been caving for 12 years, but nothing, not a single tight squeeze or sudden drop, had prepared me for the sound of the world closing in behind me. It wasn't a rumble. It was a grating, sickening crunch. A section of the ceiling, a whole slab of ancient rock, had sheared off and now sealed the narrow passage I'd just squeezed through. I was trapped, deeper than anyone would think to look for me, until the morning, maybe longer. My breath hitched, tasting of wet earth and fear. My light was strong, but the beam couldn't penetrate the absolute, suffocating blackness that began just a few feet away. Swallowing the edges of the rock, I checked my supplies. Half a bottle of water, 3 energy bars. My emergency radio was useless, buried too deep for any signal. It was going to be a long night. After the initial panic faded, a new kind of silence fell. A silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy, attentive presence. That's when I heard it. Not a drip, not a settling of rock. Something else. A sound like wet, heavy fabric being dragged across the muddy floor. Then, stopping. I held my breath until my lungs burned. My headlamp swung wildly for a second, catching only wet, glistening rock. Nothing. But the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the sound that chilled me. It was the exhalation that followed. Deep, raspy, like air pushing through a waterlogged sieve. And it was close. I slowly raised my headlamp. The beam was a perfect round spotlight of false security. I needed to see what was breathing my air. The light hit something, not the wall, something low to the ground, reflecting the beam back with an unsettling, oily sheen. It moved like a snake, or perhaps a hand without bones. Quick, silent, impossible. The smell hit me then. Decay, sulfur, and the cold, metallic tang of blood. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I realized I was pressed so tightly against the wall that the rock dust was scraping against my suit. I didn't see the body, only the eyes, 2 unsettlingly reflective orbs, like polished obsidian, catching the very edge of my light beam from the absolute blackness. They were too far apart, too large. They held no warmth, no intelligence I could recognize, only a terrible, predatory patience. The sound returned, louder this time, a slow, scraping slish as the thing, the something alive, moved further into the chamber, unseen, always just outside the light. I considered running, but running meant abandoning my small cache of supplies and getting lost in the deeper, unexplored passages. The breath came again, closer. It smelled of the earth's deepest, most ancient secrets, and of hunger. I forced myself to be still, to mimic the cold, unmoving rock. It was a test of wills. The monster outside my light, the trapped man within it. The hours dragged. My muscles screamed from the stillness, but every small shift I made was met with an answering, subtle rustle from the shadows. I saw it again, a flash of movement, impossibly fast. A thin, segmented appendage, translucent and wet, reaching and then snapping back into the dark. It wasn't trying to attack. Not yet. It was studying me, cataloging my vulnerability, waiting for the exhaustion to grant it a final, easy opportunity. Then, just before the first hint of morning could possibly penetrate the earth, the feeling of presence began to recede, slowly, unsettlingly. The last thing I heard was the sound of wet, heavy movement, not toward me, but away, down into a deep crevice in the floor. A sound like a final, satisfied sigh. The crushing fear was replaced by a cold, lingering certainty. I was safe for now, but I was not alone. And the creature, whatever it was, knew exactly where to find me when the sun went down again. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark.
They told me the old quarry was cursed, that the water was too cold, too deep. They said never to swim here after midnight. But they were wrong about everything important in life. So I figured they were wrong about this too. I stood on the slick, cold stone edge, the moonless night sucking all color from the world. The air was heavy and smelled of wet earth and something metallic like old pennies. I could feel the cold radiating up from the depths, a kind of inverse heat that promised a brutal shock. It wasn't fear that kept me from jumping. It was just the perfect, thrilling hesitation before defiance. The initial submersion was a gasp-inducing cold that felt less like water and more like liquid ice. I pushed off the bottom step and floated, suspended in the dark, silent liquid. For a moment, it was beautiful. Absolute isolation. A cold, velvet embrace. That silence was the first sign. It wasn't the natural silence of the deep. It was a held silence, a breathless pause in a room full of waiting things. My ears strained for the familiar sounds of water settling, but there was only the sound of my own heart, suddenly too loud. Then came the tremor, not a vibration in the water, but a deep, resonant thrum in the heavy rock beneath the water. A sound that belonged to geological plates shifting, not to a freshwater quarry. It was immediately followed by a slick, low-frequency sound of something enormous moving. Too close, too slow. I spun, kicking hard to face the direction of the noise. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating dark. But the texture of the water had changed. It was no longer smooth. It was a current now, a dense, muscular undertow that did not move past me, but seemed to orbit me. And then, below me, a pair of lights flickered to life. Not bioluminescence, but a terrible, phosphorescent, sickly yellow glow that felt ancient and wrong. They were massive, spaced impossibly far apart, and they were rising. Eyes. The eyes of the Deepwater Maw. The air exploded above me as a serpentine dark green mass breached the surface, and a mouth, a cavernous, impossibly large maw, snapped shut where I had been a second before. The sound was a wet crack of water being annihilated. I saw the rows of razor-sharp teeth glinting in the cold, reflective light. My lungs burned, but I couldn't stop for air. Every muscle was screaming, powered by a panic that transcended pain. The dock, the stone. I had to reach the edge, had to feel something solid under my hands. I tore through the water, the red of my swimsuit, a desperate, impossible beacon in the dark. The shadow was faster. I could feel the displacement of the water behind me, a silent, overwhelming force pushing me forward. It wasn't swimming, it was being driven. I risked a desperate look back and saw only the terrifying, hyper-realistic blur of the massive, slimy, dark green creature's form right below the surface. Gaining, I slammed against the slick, mossy stone of the dock's edge. My fingernails scraped for purchase on the wet surface. I pulled, I climbed. One shoulder was out of the water, then my chest. Safety was one agonizing pull away. The world dissolved in a blinding white flash of pain. A vice of impossibly sharp pressure closed around my right ankle. It was the Deepwater Maw. Its jaw, lined with those razor-sharp teeth, had snagged me just as I thought I was free. I roared, a pathetic, underwater muffled sound. I gripped the stone with both hands, my back arching, fighting a dead weight of crushing, silent power that pulled me downward. The slick stone offered no grip. My fingers slid against the cold, wet surface. The maw surfaced slightly, its enormous serpentine head appearing next to me. Its skin was a slimy, dark green, reflecting the cold light with a sickly sheen. It didn't rush, it just pulled, with slow, deliberate, devastating strength. The fight was gone, replaced by a deep, absolute terror. My right hand slipped, then my left. I felt the stone scrape away from my chest, and the cold water rushed in to embrace me again. I was pulled back, completely under the surface, the bright red of my swimsuit now a stain in the profound dark. The air I had been holding rushed out in a final futile stream of bubbles. I was in its element now, completely submerged, completely helpless. The icy cold penetrated to my very bones, and my terrified green eyes stared wildly into the surrounding abyss. I tried to look up, to see the distant, churning patch of surface that was my last connection to the world. But the maw shifted, wrapping a heavy, crushing coil around my torso. The pressure was immense, driving the last air from my lungs. The massive head drifted closer, its movement silent, overwhelming. The sickly yellow phosphorescent eyes were now inches from mine, unblinking, endless. They weren't intelligent. They were ancient, predatory hunger distilled into light. I was a curiosity, a meal, a final, fleeting violation of its domain. The maw opened its mouth, slowly, not to bite, but to display. The cavernous opening was a nightmare of glistening, razor-sharp teeth and dark, wet flesh. It smelled of decay and the deep places of the earth. The terror was so absolute, it was almost serene. I felt the serpentine body adjust its grip, not releasing the ankle, but ensuring I was perfectly positioned. The pressure on my ribs ratcheted up. A slow, terrible preparation. I was being pulled deeper now, into a darkness beyond the quarry, into a lightless grave. The ankle felt numb now, a distant memory, but the feeling of the teeth, the countless serrated edges, was spreading. The maw was not just crushing, it was tasting, sampling the flesh that defied the warning. I felt the tiny pricks, the violation of my skin. Then came the final, deafening sound that cut through the water. A massive, wet crunch that felt less like bone breaking and more like the end of the world. It wasn't pain that followed. It was the sudden, shattering cessation of everything. The light was fading, the sickly yellow eyes of the maw blurring, losing their terrifying focus. They were right. The realization was the final cold thought before the pressure, the darkness, and the overwhelming silent creature finally consumed the light from my wide, terrified green eyes. The water became still again, cold and silent. The maw, a massive, shadowy form, drifted deeper. A single, insignificant scrap of bright red fabric, a piece of a swimsuit, floated slowly, lazily upwards toward the now invisible surface. The Deepwater Maw's cavernous mouth, a nightmare of teeth and slimy green flesh, passed in front of the last remnant of reflective light. The sickly yellow eyes, now receding into the abyss, gave one final indifferent flash. Then, absolute, eternal darkness.
Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark.
The ice was a sheet of obsidian, cracked only by the groaning of the cold. I had been walking for 6 hours, maybe 7. The horizon was a black line against a slightly less black sky. There was no moon, only the terrible, electric glow of the ice itself. My survival depended on reaching the other side. My desperation was a physical ache, a second skin beneath the wind-bitten flesh. I looked back then, a quick, almost involuntary twitch of the neck. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a pillar of shadow cast by nothing, a phantom born of exhaustion. I kept walking, 1 foot, then the next, the rhythm of survival. Do not stop. Do not look. But the cold, the silence, They demanded a witness. They forced my eyes rearward. It wasn't gone. It hadn't moved. It was just there. A geometry of absence. I started running. A clumsy, desperate scramble on the slick, unforgiving surface. Every breath was a needle in my lungs. When I finally dared to glance back, it was the same. The same distance. The same impossible stillness. That's when the terror truly set in. It wasn't chasing me. It was simply following. The space between us was fixed. I could run for 1,000 miles or stand completely still. It made no difference. I stopped the frantic pace, slowing to a weary, heavy walk, conserving what little warmth I had left. I watched it for a long, agonizing moment. No movement, no shifting of its weight. It was not a body. A perfect, light-devouring silhouette. A cutout from the night itself. And there were no tracks behind it. The cold became my companion, whispering promises of rest. Every muscle screamed for me to lie down. But the figure was the greater terror. I knew the moment I stopped for good, the distance would collapse. What would happen then? I couldn't bear to imagine the absence closing in. Hours passed. The blue tint deepened to a sterile, terrifying indigo. I was running out of time. Running out of lake. I realized then, the destination didn't matter. There was no safety on the other side. The figure wasn't waiting for me to reach the shore. It was waiting for me to cease moving. I rose to my feet. The strength was gone, replaced by a dull, aching indifference. I took one last shuddering breath that crystallized instantly in the night air. I turned away from the far shore and started walking slowly toward the black silhouette. The distance remained fixed, impossible, but now it was me who refused to break the spell.
Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. I told myself it was just the wind, that the old logging road was playing tricks on the sound, carrying the shriek of an owl or the rubbing of two dry branches. But deep down, I knew that sound. It was laughter, not a happy laugh. Not human. It was thin and reedy, like dried leather being scraped. And it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Just behind the thickest part of the forest line. Silas. That's my name. I was an idiot who thought he could hike out to the old man's mine and prove the legend wrong. Now, the legend was laughing at me. I clicked the flashlight off. Instantly, the dark rushed in. A physical, smothering blanket of cold air and the smell of rot and wet earth. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. When the laughter came again, it was closer. No longer just a sound, but a vibration. It resonated in my chest, a giddy, cold tremor that made my teeth ache. I took a single, agonizing step backward. My boot crushed a handful of dead ferns. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. The laugh. Then, A new sound, a faint shh noise, like something long and heavy being dragged over wet stone, just out of my light's cone. I swung the light. Nothing, just an old, crooked hemlock. But as the beam passed, I saw it. A shadow that didn't obey the light. A flicker of movement faster than my eye could track. It was playing with me, waiting for me to run. Or maybe just waiting for me to break. I forced myself to walk, not run. Each step was a commitment to the idea that I was rational, that the shadows were just shadows. The next laugh was right behind the tree line I was passing. It wasn't reedy anymore. It was wet, a bubbling, joyful gurgle. I stumbled over a root, falling to my knees. The flashlight tumbled and rolled, its beams spinning wildly, painting the forest with flashes of dizzying light. And in one of those flashes, I saw it. Not clear. Out of focus, but undeniable. A flash of pale, slick skin, and a jaw stretched impossibly wide in a silent, ecstatic grin. I scrambled forward, grabbed the light, and bolted. Everything was noise now. My ragged breaths, the pounding of my boots, the relentless, echoing laughter that seemed to be keeping pace effortlessly. It wasn't running, it was gliding. I could hear the wet shh of its limbs dragging. And it was getting louder. The air grew bitterly cold, a localized, unnatural drop in temperature that stole the air from my lungs. I felt a cold pressure on the back of my neck. I dared to swing the light again. I saw a hand. No, not a hand. A collection of long, white, finger-like extensions splayed out on a patch of moss. The laughter was a cacophony now, a choir of impossible voices, all with that same reedy, gurgling joy. They were mocking my fear. I remembered the legend. You cannot find it. It must find you. It wasn't following me. It was waiting for me to arrive. I heard a voice, separate from the laughter, whisper my name, Silas. It sounded like the rubbing of dry tree bark right next to my ear. I didn't look. I couldn't. I forced myself to pick up the flashlight, my hands slick with sweat and moss, and began to walk again. But now I walked towards the sound. Every step was a surrender. The forest stopped resisting me. The branches didn't snag. The roots didn't trip. It was making the path easy. A vast, black pool of shadow stretched out before me, deeper than the night itself. It wasn't the end of the forest. It was the start of something else. The laughter reached its peak. A sound of pure, unadulterated, triumphant joy at my arrival. It was the sound of something hungry, finally fed. I let go of the flashlight. The last thing I saw before the complete eternal dark was my own reflection in the lens and the silent, wet grin that had settled onto my own face. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark. The commission was simple. Catalog the records of old St. Jude's before the demolition. My hands, already prone to their nervous tremor, shook visibly as I inserted the massive iron key into the lock, the cold metal grating a complaint into the silence. The basement door groaned open like a dying beast, releasing a sudden, foul gust of air that tasted of wet earth and something ancient, something deeply wrong. I hesitated on the threshold. My instructions were clear. Don't go past the first vault. Everything else is structural, but my job, my true weakness, was everything else. I clutched the single battery-powered lantern. The stairs were steep, crumbling concrete steps that bled moisture. Every downward step was met with a sickening echo that didn't sound like it came from my step at all. It sounded like a second, slower descent. Following mine, the deeper I went, the colder it became. A damp, grave cold that no cellar should possess, even in October. It seeped into the wool of my cardigan, chilling the very marrow of my bones. I found the first vault. 10 boxes of sermons and baptismal records, exactly as promised. My hands were already shaking too much to write, so I just stood there, listening to the silence. It wasn't silent, though. There was a low, almost subsonic humming beneath the concrete floor. Like the world's most enormous, long-forgotten machinery was trying to start up again, just for me. I moved deeper, past the structural support columns. The air quality deteriorated. The smell of rot and ozone mixed with the wet earth. My instructions were a forgotten whisper, and then I saw the door. Not the vault door, but a smaller, low door, reinforced with newer-looking steel, half hidden behind a coil of rusted pipework. It was clearly the reason for the warning. The door had a single, heavy padlock, a new one, almost mocking in its clean brass shine against the filth. It seemed less designed to keep people out and more to keep something in. Curiosity. That professional pathology was winning. I tried the padlock. Locked. I pulled on the handle. Locked. I heard a faint squeak from the other side. Not metal, but something biological. I backed away, telling myself it was a rat or the settling of the foundation, but I hadn't heard the humming since I stopped. Only that expectant, echoing silence. That's when the light began to fail. My sturdy lantern, which had held a charge for days, suddenly stuttered. A terrifying, rhythmic flicker, plunging the basement into blackness for half a second at a time. During one of those brief, terrible moments of utter darkness, I felt the air move, not a draft. Something large displacing the air, very close to the back of my neck. I spun fully around. Nothing, just the concrete pillars and the endless shadows. But the fear had found its permanent home now. It wasn't the place, it was the predator. Then, from the darkness behind the farthest column, not a sound, but a color. 2 spots of the palest, wettest ivory. They blinked. The spots were eyes, unblinking now. They hadn't moved, They hadn't made a sound, but they were looking at me, calculating, patient, and terribly, terribly hungry. My tremor became a full-body seizure. I dropped the notepad and pencil. The faint clatter, sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The eyes did not react. I took one single slow step backward. The eyes did not move. I took another. The eyes widened just fractionally. A subtle shift that felt like a scream. I knew I couldn't run. Panic would only trigger whatever it was. I had to walk. I had to act like I hadn't seen it, hadn't noticed the impossible thing that watched me. The air in front of me shifted again. Not the whole thing, just a spot near the ground. And then I saw it. A finger. Longer than any human finger should be. Impossibly slender. Bone white. It was not coming for me. It was steering me. The finger curled, indicating a path not toward the stairs, but deeper into the machinery room, into the true blackness. The humming returned, stronger now, vibrating through my boots. It wasn't machinery. It was the thing's chest cavity, a sound of anticipation, of a slow, delicious preparation. I made a run for the stairs, a pointless, flailing sprint. The lantern slipped from my grasp, striking the concrete, plunging everything into absolute, immediate, crushing dark. The tremors stopped. The humming stopped. All that remained was the presence and a slow, slick, drawing sound, like a creature pulling itself out of something deep and wet. The final entry in the logbook, found years later, was a single smeared word. Mine. Don't move yet. The next story is already waiting in the dark.
The desert does not tolerate witnesses. I've known that for 20 years. But there was a thing, a vacancy in the sand, that left a track I couldn't ignore. It was too smart, too human in its step. For 3 days, the trail led me deeper into the mesa's throat. My pack was light, but the heat was a lead weight. I was listening for the silence. The true, absolute silence where all desert sound goes to die. A sun dropped like a severed eye. I built my fire, not for warmth, but for the geometry of the light pushing back the dark. And then I heard it, a voice, thin as a needle, speaking my sister's name. Silas, you left her. It wasn't an echo. It was a whisper. A perfect, raspy human cadence from a throat I knew was not human. It carried no direction, just weight. I gripped my rifle. Sleep was a luxury already gone. The next morning, the beast showed itself for the first time. Not fully, but a shift in the air, a shadow where there should have been none. Its fur was the color of dried silt, then bleached bone, then red rock. It left me a gift, a pile of my own spent casings, arranged in a small, cruel spiral on a flat stone. It had been watching me, not following, but ahead of me the entire time. You're getting tired, Tracker. Your steps are loud. You miss the sound of her voice, don't you? The voice was closer now, like breathing over my shoulder, though I spun to nothing but empty, shimmering air. That night, I kept walking. The moon was a bleached skull in the sky. I saw things in the shadows that moved too quickly for a mammal, and yet too gracefully for a ghost. I convinced myself I was tracking it, but the truth pressed in, cold as stone. It was tracking me. It was corralling me, pushing me into its chosen killing ground. I hadn't slept for 60 hours. The isolation had cracked the shell of my logic. I started whispering back, "What do you want?" A childish question. The answer was already in its eyes. "I want the story, Silas. The final chapter. You've kept me hungry for too long." The beast was speaking in full, unnervingly articulate sentences now. It was a terrible, mocking intelligence. "I found a deep, narrow canyon, a wound in the earth. My only chance was to lose it in the vertical darkness, to force a close-quarters fight where its camouflage couldn't save it. The air in the canyon was thick with a strange metallic smell, and the dust didn't settle. Every scratch of my boot on the stone echoed like a gunshot, then was instantly swallowed. And then I saw the carvings, not natural erosion, but symbols deeply etched that looked like broken birds and screaming faces. Its lair wasn't just a cave, it was a terrible shrine. I heard the crunch of stone above me. It was up there, watching me navigate its maze. The walls remember everything, Silas. They remember the names you whisper when you think you're alone. The chase became a scramble. I turned a corner, and there it was. No shadow, no shift, but fully rendered. A hideous blend of sleek predator and mocking intellect. I fired. The sound was deafening, concussive. The round struck rock an inch from its shoulder. It didn't flinch. It just let out a wet, raspy sigh. "A miss, old friend." It moved like liquid. 1 second it was there. The next it was a blur of sand-colored fur flanking me. I felt the hot, fetid breath on my neck before the first claw raked my side. I slammed my shoulder into it, a desperate, futile tackle. It was shockingly light, like hitting a sack of bones, but the force of its retaliation was immense, knocking the air from my lungs. My rifle clattered onto the rock. The beast immediately stood over it, planting a paw on the weapon. It didn't look at the rifle. Its intelligent yellow eyes stayed fixed on my face. "It's not the gun I wanted, Silas. It was the chase, the anticipation. Now, tell me the story again. Tell me about the scream you heard that night." A primal fury, fueled by lack of sleep and 3 days of terror, leapt through me. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for a sharp, broken shard of rock. I plunged the stone, blindly, Into the soft underbelly, I saw beneath its lean, hard ribs. It let out a sound that was not a whimper or a snarl, but a long, drawn-out word of disbelief. The beast fell back. Its fur stopped shifting, freezing into the color of black, oily tar. The human mouth, now slack and torn, finally grew silent, but the yellow eyes, they didn't fade. They kept watching. I am out of the canyon. I have the rifle and the knife. The sun is a friendly, brutal lie in the sky. But the silence is different now. I hear it still, not in the air, but inside my head. A cold, dry promise. I'll be waiting for the next story. Tracker.
Like this video before something in the dark likes you. Subscribe now or you'll miss the next scream. And comment below. If you dare, tell me your worst fear.